when they talk about work view and life view
Mm-hmm.
and coherency.
Mm-hmm.
They're kind of proposing, like, you're probably reading this book because you want a coherent life, where your values match with the work you're doing. You're who you are, what you believe, and what you're doing, that there's coherency between those. So that's where I go.
Okay.
And I'm not sure if that helps. For me, it's chapter 9 in the book, choosing happiness.
Okay.
That's the problem I'm solving for, is I want to have happiness and joy in my life.
Yeah. Like if I'm thinking of just applying this to having a coherent life, it's like either you do or you don't. It feels kind of dichotomous to me. Like if we were to say the goal is to have a coherent life, either you kind of do or you don't. When you think about career, play, love, and health, there's like a layer of knowing where you're at with those and where you want to go.
Welcome back to In Residence. I'm Keith.
And I'm Laura.
Hey, Laura.
Hey, Keith.
How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Doing good. Should we dive right into it?
I think we should. I'm really excited.
Okay. I was in a book club. We read and listened to Designing Your Life, How to Build a Well-Lived, Joyful Life. It's by Bill Burnett and Dave Evans. The moment after I started reading it, I'm like, oh, this is something that you and I do and are trying to do that's really resonating with me.
Mm-hmm.
So I was working on the book, going through it with a group, and then I'm like, you gotta dive into this.
I did.
What are your thoughts?
I can see why you recommended it, because it is full of topics that you and I are constantly talking about with each other. I think it'll give us more framing as we go through some of those conversations in the future.
Well, it's literally called Designing Your Life. We've all but had many of these conversations about topics that they talk about in this book.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, oh my gosh, somebody wrote a book on what we're working on.
Right.
It wasn't a complete overwhelm of, oh no, I'm not original. Somebody's already done something like this. It was because we had listened to The Gap and the Gain also.
Mm-hmm.
I felt a part of it, oh, I'm not original. Like we talked about that before. And then I was like, actually, this is affirming, because it means there are other people out there thinking about this and working on this
Mm-hmm.
and seeking to create a better designed life for themselves. So
Right.
I think I was just a little bit like, okay, feel a little weird, but actually this is more affirming than anything. I was really like, I'm still kind of sitting in that where I'm like, kind of validated me
Mm-hmm.
in a way,
Sure.
in the way that you and I have been talking and thinking about, how do we set ourselves up in all these different areas of our life, because it's not just one thing.
Right.
They focus a little bit on work in this, because I think their demographic that they're going for is college students and designing a life with work, because once you leave college, you need a job kind of thing. I held on to like a little bit more of the other categories that they talk about. I want to get into that. So, talking about talking.
The book is approaching designing your life with design thinking as a framework.
Yes.
And I have learned quite a bit about design thinking in the roles that I have had. One institution in particular, design thinking was a way that we approached everything, because it's known to really help with innovation. And the idea is that you're not designing something for people to have, consume, be aware of. It's also about thinking, how can we develop something that is solving a problem that the user or the person that is going to be potentially using this thing you're creating, how do you solve the problem that is most central to that user? There's so many things I want to talk about throughout the book, but I think it's important that we name up front that it's really based on that design thinking framework and theory. And I have seen that approach work really well in the field that I'm in.
I got into the book and it was talking about mind mapping.
Mhm.
And I'm like, oh, Laura's made me do this.
I have made you do that.
And I'm like, she's been holding out on me. Like, she knows this stuff.
I've been holding
And
out.
I think you're trying to like Mr. Miyagi me. And like I think I'm doing one thing. And then all of a sudden I get this epiphany of like, oh, Laura taught me how to do mind mapping 6 years ago. Or it's not something, a lot of the things that they talk about, aside from like applicable things they talk about with the design thinking and the 5 mindsets that I'm going to list off here really quick in a minute. A lot of the exercises were not things I've seen or been introduced to in my learnings as a person. And so when that popped up, I'm like, oh, this would have been really helpful when I was in my 20s or in my late teens, thinking about what's the next steps for me. And when I get into like the theory and the ideas that they're talking about that support why they're doing these exercises, those are things that we've been talking about for years, and even more so over the last few years. And that's why I think it resonated with me. I'm like, oh, okay, there are other ways for me to get some support, and other people have done this work, and it just really like connected with me. And so like, yeah, the design thinking aspect, they talk about 5 things, and to me it's kind of funny because it's like I've been thinking about some of these things, like curiosity. That's one of the mindsets, is being curious.
Yep.
I'm like trying to not be anxious by uncertainty and not knowing. I'm like, I want to be more open to opportunity, possibility, and like you always say, being curious. I'm like, oh, that's right. Curious. That's what that's called. What?
Sorry. You're like, oh, that's what that's called.
Yeah.
Curiosity.
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry, I'm laughing at you. You're like, oh.
Like, oh, the opposite of how I am is called curious. Oh, okay. I mean, I'm curious about a lot of things, but it tends to be a little more introspective and a little more like work silently by yourself.
I mean, I think the piece, like you're saying, curiosity for you is a little bit more introspective, and sometimes the curiosity where it can have the most power is when things aren't going the way you think they're going to go.
Yeah. So, okay, I'm going to list these off real quick.
Okay, go ahead.
The 5 mindsets.
Sorry, I got stuck.
Curiosity, bias to action, reframing, awareness, radical collaboration.
Yeah.
And so my curiosity is usually internally driven. I want to know something. I want to learn something.
Sure.
And then when you look down and they're talking about how collaboration is key, I've not often found a partner to collaborate with before you, for sure. And even us, before the last few years, we haven't really had a project like we do now, like with the podcast and some other things that are working and going on in the background. We've had other kind of life projects, but it just seemed a little more natural. Whereas like now it's like, oh, I have to work with you.
Right.
And like the joke is sometimes it's like, don't work with family, so it kind of makes me giggle a little bit. But so the other things too, like a bias to action, like that's like my theme for the year, focused action. And part of that probably came out of, I was reading this at the end of December of 2024 going into this year. Awareness, I talk about that all the time because that clicked several years ago where I'm like, oh, I need to be in tune with what is going on inside me, outside of me, around me, and just being able to notice. It's such a key step into moving forward, right? And so those 5 mindsets that they talk about in this book, I was just like, cool. Like, I think I know this, but now it's time to act on it. It was like a little bit of like a little boost for me to be like, okay, cool. Like I'm on the right path and I'm going to keep working these things. So,
yeah.
Did that stick out as strongly to you, or is it like, you're like, well, I've kind of known this. So it's like, because like I see you have a bias to action. Like we've talked about it several times on here where I'm like, Laura's go, go, go. And I'm like, think.
Well, no, I thought it was good to say it explicitly, because we can think too much. I mean, we need to plan. I think planning's important.
Yeah.
And it does take time to be strategic. But if you wait too long in planning for everything to be perfect or just right or everything's defined and you don't start acting, you might have planned something that is the most beautiful thing on paper. But when it comes to conversations with people, when it comes to implementing it for users, it may not exactly hit the mark and not work. And so getting faster to that action piece, I think can be really helpful.
And that one thing I really appreciated was it talked about that bias to action. They call it prototyping.
Yeah.
It's generative. It's, okay, this is version 1. Get it out there, test it. And then it even brings up that thing that I bristle against, that move fast and break stuff. That bumps up against that perfectionism that was instilled in me, right? Of doing it right. Mm-hmm. Whereas this is more, let's be iterative. Let's be good enough. We're not trying to make something bad, but we're also not holding ourselves back from being able to do the next one. Because going through the whole process, having a prototype means then we can reflect and see how is it actually behaving under the conditions that we thought it was going to be in. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, that screw fell out. Okay, let's go back to the drawing board mm-hmm. and design it in a better way, you know?
Yeah. Something they said in the book that really resonated with me around the prototyping concept you're talking about is that building is thinking.
Yeah.
Because we can often think a lot more before we start building. And you want to do some thinking before you build, but really building can be iterative and thinking at the same time as you're figuring it out. And the other piece they emphasized is that prototyping is a way, in this case, when we're talking about designing your life, of sneaking up on your future.
Yeah.
I really, really like that. Sometimes we can think there's future you that is doing all the things you want to be doing or think you want to be doing. And so you're going to create the whole plan. And if you follow it perfectly, that's where you'll end up. When perhaps maybe a different way to think about it or go about it is to build and learn and build and learn and think and learn and build. And so you're like slowly getting to that idea as you're creating future you too. I thought that was kind of a great way to think about it.
That building is thinking, because I think it was even last time we were talking on the mics, we started talking about process. You could tell my mood was getting a little lighter and elevated in a good way.
Yeah.
I think I forget how much I enjoy making things. It's just like how much I forget that my mood is affected by my movement. And when I'm not moving, a simple fix, I'm like, oh, when's the last time I moved my body?
Yeah.
Right? And simply moving my body elevates my mood. It's the same thing when I'm in a process of a project. And you get in that, they talk about flow state in here too. When we get into that, it's such a mood enhancer. And I guess maybe for me, it's like when I see the thing of like, oh, this is a way of building towards your future. It's like, oh, that's right. But to do that, I need to build, not think about building.
Right.
You know?
How did you feel about, they talked from your building your life standpoint, that you're going to change your life and really every about 4 years, you're working towards something different. How did that feel for you?
I like it because that helps me get out of that doing it right mentality. There is an opportunity to recalibrate. They talk about, because they do this reframing, right?
Yeah.
Throughout, and they're like, dysfunctional belief. I should already know where I'm going.
Mm-hmm.
And the reframe is, you can't know where you're going until you know where you are. So I think I like that because one, it's telling me like, well, if you need to know where you are, that means you get to be introspective and think about that, right? So that I love that. That's a way for me to think and fall into that strength. But then I have to go to, well, this is where I am. Where do I want to go? And what are the actions I'm going to take and I'm getting more excited to do the thinking, so therefore I can say the actions and then put that process in motion. Like we were talking about process. I want to be the planning is part of the process, but I want to enjoy and be more engaged in the doing of the things that get me to where I want to go, instead of thinking of like, well, wouldn't it be great if I did this? Or, oh, the possibility of that sounds pretty intriguing. It's like, go and prototype that and test it and document the actions I'm taking to see what I get from that. When they talk about that stuff, it's like empowering to me, I guess, of like, okay, I can choose to do something and try it out. And if it works, awesome. If it doesn't, guess what? I just figured out something I don't want. Because I think that was maybe another thing they said. It's not about, and I heard this somewhere else, I probably from my trainer actually too, but it's more of like, you don't necessarily have to think about everything you want to add, but also what do you want to leave behind?
Right.
Like what isn't serving me?
Yeah.
Kind of popping all over the book, but all these like really great gems of thoughts to help me keep moving forward are like sprinkled throughout the book, and it's all connected. But yeah, how about you? Like with that, to me, it's like, I kind of already said it, like it's generative, it's regenerative too. And where it's like, okay, if one thing doesn't work out, it doesn't, because it skips ahead too in the book, the failure immunity.
That was an interesting
right
concept.
And that's something that I can stand to really develop, is the moving fast and breaking things. Like that makes me bristle, but prototyping, testing, that kind of intrigues me and makes me feel more like a scientist. And I can lean into that part of it and think of it as I'm experimenting, I'm building, and not everything you build works out, but then you can go back and reiterate. So
yeah. Because you were just talking about, well, you talk about quite a few things there. Sorry.
I'm good at that.
Like you said, you popcorned a little bit all over. But you were talking about, correct me if I'm wrong, I think you were talking about kind of how there can be different options or avenues that you can go, right? Were you talking about that?
Sure. If I didn't explicitly say it, that's one thing that comes up when I think about this stuff, is like, oh, there is possibility and there are options.
Yeah. Because it kind of, there's a whole, I think it's a whole chapter, but talking about being stuck and how to get unstuck.
Yeah. Is it called Getting Unstuck?
I think it is called Getting Unstuck.
Getting Unstuck.
They talked about...
I took some notes in there.
Did
you?
Sure.
Yeah.
When you're stuck, that can really be a launching pad to start being creative.
Yeah.
Which sometimes it can feel really daunting. But the thing I highlighted that I wanted to share is when you think like a designer, you know how to ideate, how to flare, quote unquote, to come up with lots of options for lots of possible futures. It said, because you can't know what you want until you know what you might want. So you are going to have to generate a lot of ideas and possibilities.
One of the things I highlighted was prototypes lower your anxiety, because you get data about the potential of the change that you're trying to accomplish. And was this also kind of paired with having so many good choices that you get stuck? Was that in this section, or was that in another section? Could have been in a different book too. But that popped up this last week also, where it's like, I have all these great ideas. And they're like, well, if they're all great, then cut half of them. And then if they're still good ideas, and you can't figure it out, it's like, well, that's a great problem to have. That means that anyone you pick is a good idea to move forward on. And so there was some of that going on in my head this week too, because I can see how people get stuck with I get stuck with an abundance of choice.
Yep.
You've witnessed
I've
that
seen that. Yeah.
many times. So that is something to go back to and read through and think about, because every yes is a no, right? Like if I'm saying yes to something, it means I'm saying no to everything else. Is
For
like
right now.
that's
Right?
what people say. Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, adding like the for right now, or
A little bit of a reframe.
like reframing, or like the thing where people are like, well, I'm not good at that, and you say yet, add that little ways to not, I guess, maybe cut ourselves down or to allow ourselves room for growth is a good mindset to have, I think.
The idea of when you're stuck, really making sure you're ideating. And like you said, coming up with a lot of good potential options that you can choose from. That's only going to help make a better choice.
That chapter, Getting Unstuck, was about ideation and mind mapping.
Yep.
And allowing yourself to think of what are these ideas. And I mean, I think they even say never go with your first idea, because it's usually like the most obvious and it's probably already been done, or
I like that a lot. I mean, and they argued, in I think a fairly convincing way, as humans, we really want to go with the first thing that's going to solve the problem. Our brains, they want to be efficient. They want to have certainty.
Yeah.
And so to sit in that discomfort of ideation and not knowing where we're going, that can be really hard. It can be powerful to just know that your brain is going to try and get you to make a decision on something like the first idea solves the problem, let's go. But if you're really looking for something that is going to be unique, impactful, maybe wait a beat.
Not letting the noise in your head, that shadow noise, I call it, or I've heard it called.
I call it Shady Laura.
Yeah. Like that's the part of you that we don't want change. We want to be comfortable. What we know is more comfortable than the uncertainty. Being able to recognize when that's happening and saying, all right, I'm going to go a little further here. There's probably a couple more ideas I can think of. What are some more solutions?
Yeah.
They talk about the situations versus problems.
Yeah, I wanted to talk to you about that because what's interesting, our conversation went kind of right to the solutions, ideation and things like that. I wanted to see if we could talk a little bit about how do you identify the problem in the first place? Because they spent quite a bit of time on that, kind of that idea of.
Well, I think this is where it gets into systems thinking that we've been exploring, like with Seth Godin's This is Strategy. Like that's where I first heard this gravity, right? That's the way he illustrates it. And they talk about that. That's very similarly in this book of you can't solve gravity. It's the way it is. So don't waste your energy trying to solve a situation. You have to face reality of this is the way the system works. So if it's out of your control, it's out of your control. Move on to the next thing. And so if you're trying to solve a problem, that means there's a solution.
Yes.
I haven't really interrogated that more beyond the fact that I'm like, oh, that is so freeing to be able to say, that's a situation that I've been trying to solve. That is out of my control. Therefore, I don't need to waste my time and energy trying to solve it because it's not solvable. That's just the way it is.
Mm-hmm.
I can't solve gravity. It's a law of nature.
Right.
It's beyond me. It's bigger than me. And so that's something I think I maybe need more work on to maybe answer what you're maybe asking me.
Well, I think I just wanted to back up because design thinking, again, is really about figuring out and clearly defining what is the problem we're trying to solve, not what is the product we're trying to create.
When they talk about work view and life view and coherency. They're kind of proposing, like, you're probably reading this book because you want a coherent life, where your values match with the work you're doing. You're who you are, what you believe, and what you're doing, that there's coherency between those. So that's where I go.
Okay.
And I'm not sure if that helps.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's good to keep in mind, but I also wonder, is the problem you're trying to solve to have a coherent life with your values, or what is it that you're trying to, so it's almost like we're missing like a goal or like a
Well,
aspiration or like a
for me, it's chapter 9 in the book, choosing happiness.
okay.
That's that's the problem I'm solving for, is I want to have happiness and joy in my life.
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure where else to go with it, because that's just the way I've taken this book and approach it. For me to be happy, I need to have the different areas of my life serving and giving and taking in concert. And so that just brings me back to, I need to be aware of where I am and how I'm doing, right? And like those mindsets and checking them off. I mean, in that part, the dysfunctional belief, there's a couple I highlighted. It was like, to be happy, I have to make the right choice.
Mm-hmm.
And the reframe is, there's no right choice, only good choosing.
Mm-hmm.
Another one is, happiness is having it all. The reframe is, happiness is letting go of what you don't need, right? I kind of hit on that one earlier. For me, like, I just want to have a happy life.
Yeah.
And I know it when I see it or feel it, right? If I'm at work, I know if I'm happy or not happy. If I'm having thoughts of like, how can I not come back here? I know something needs to be adjusted, right?
Right.
If I'm home and feeling disconnected from you, I know when I'm feeling that, right? It's the
Yeah.
contentness, the coherency, right? And not everything is going to be that all the time, but understanding that and having the tools to go in between the spaces of coherent and incoherent, like, that's the work for life.
Like, I think there's a layer missing, though, of goals. Like the 4 areas: work slash career, play, love slash family, and health.
Love is like relationships in my head.
Yeah. Family, friends, love.
These are what they call like life accounts.
Yeah.
I appreciate them because they're very close to like categories like you and I were talking about over the
Right.
last couple of years. And so it's a really good way for me, for my brain. I like to categorize things. Most people do. Most
Yeah.
people like patterns and categorization. So I enjoyed that little kind of hierarchy that they give us in the book.
Yeah. Where I'm going with it, like if I'm thinking of just applying this to having a coherent life, it's like either you do or you don't. It feels kind of dichotomous to me. Like if we were to say the goal is to have a coherent life, either you kind of do or you don't. When you think about career, play, love, and health, there's like a layer of knowing where you're at with those and where you want to go. And so I think that's the piece that might be missing. I think it's easier to identify what problem you might be trying to solve when you're thinking about these 4 different parts of your life. Because design thinking is all about identifying what is the problem you're trying to solve. And when you're looking at trying to solve things in your life, you're really looking at those 4 different areas: career, play, love, and health. And so to really know where you're going and what ideas you're ideating around so you can help move those areas forward in your life, you need to be clear about what is it you're trying to do. And that's where knowing what you identify as the problem in those areas, if you're trying to go after it, is really important, so you can identify if it's something that you even have control over changing, or if it's something talked about anchor problems, something that you're stuck on and you probably can get through it, but you're holding yourself back because you don't know any other way. And so if the problem you're trying to solve in health is, I don't feel healthy because I want to lose 40 pounds, then you have to see, is that a gravity problem, right? Is that something that is in my control? making sure that what you're trying to go after and what your goals or the work you want to do and design in each of those areas, to make sure that you're really clear about that. So as you're prototyping, the things you're prototyping in your life and that you're trying are addressing the thing that you want to try and change. Getting to those lenses around being coherent, like having a coherent life, happiness, like that's the ultimate, like where you need to go. But like, I don't think I could say I just want to have a happy life and be like, now what will I do? I feel like I need to get more specific with myself around what is it that I truly want to move in each of those areas. And so I think we're just approaching it differently. It's not right or wrong. Does it make sense with you? I don't know if it does.
One of the first things that I read and highlighted was true happiness comes from designing a life that works for you. And that's what you and I have been talking about for a really long time, is like, how do we design the best life for us, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have specific things that you're working on. I have specific things that I work on. And then we have a collective, us. These categories, health, play, love, work, really helped me bring that into focus to take stock of, right? And to check in with yourself. And it's in whatever order, right? Like in my notebook, I tend to write health down first, because I know if I'm thinking about taking care of my mental, physical, emotional, financial health, right? That's what I love about it, is like health can be a lot of different facets of my life. And if I take care of that, I can take care of others better, right?
Right.
I know you want to kind of get down into some specifics about like, okay, how do we go about using those categories to help us design? And it's something I need your help with, because we were having a conversation just the other morning where you're like, okay, you're talking about, was I like listing off like tactics or actions in these categories? And you're like, well, what about your goal?
Yeah.
Right. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. Like, what's my compass pointing towards? What is my intention? Right? What am I aiming for?
Right.
I'm really good at making these to-do lists for myself of actions that would help me improve my health. But then you're like, well, what are your actual health goals? Like, what's the concrete thing? I could tell, like, inside of me, I'm like, I don't want to say it out loud, because then I'm on the hook.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
And so you're really good at helping me kind of come out of that shell. And I think that's where your way of thinking is very beneficial and can help a lot of people, because you can see through the smoke and mirrors that we tend to put up. Like, I kind of fool myself into thinking I'm doing something, and you're just watching me go around on this carousel, like waving like, hey, Laura, look at me. I'm on this blue unicorn today. Like, I think I'm going somewhere, but I'm really going in circles.
Yeah. The idea of trying to define the problem that you're trying to solve with your goal. And the reason I like that is because, like, a problem, it sounds so negative, but
Probably why it didn't stand out to me. I'm like, oh,
yeah.
I want everything to be happy and good.
Right. But like, I think it's helpful to really know what you're trying to do. And that's what design thinking is all about.
Yeah.
But like a guitar, and I don't know the word, so you're going to have to help me with this. Somebody invented a guitar body that has like a little cut in it. What's that called?
Cutaway?
Cutaway? Like that guitar right there? It's got a cutaway?
Like here?
Yeah.
That's an arm bevel.
Arm bevel.
Those are like cutouts.
Those are cutouts. Okay.
Yeah.
So when somebody
Ergonomics
designed the arm bevel, what problem were they trying to solve?
Probably nerve pain and like fatigue of somebody's arm resting on the edge of the guitar.
Exactly. So somebody didn't just come out and be like, I'm just going to do this because I think it looks cool. Maybe they did. I don't know.
Right.
But they most likely developed it for the problem they were trying to solve. That's why I think it's really powerful to think about what are those things in your life, in those 4 life accounts, career, play, love, health, that really is underneath the goals you're setting for yourself. Like what what things, if you go one layer deeper besides what your goal is, that you're trying to address through the goal you're setting.
Okay, so help me out here. So like my goal for health, physical health, is I want to lose weight. And I have a specific number
Yep.
that I want to hit.
Yes.
So with that in mind, what do you think there's something underneath that?
So there's kind of that why underneath that.
Why do I want to lose weight?
Right.
Because I want to have like a healthier body, right? I want to be able to do things that are maybe hard for me right now. I want to live as long as I can, right?
Right.
And for me, that's connected to the love category. I want to live longer so that I can spend more time with you and our kids.
Yeah. And so the problem you're trying to solve, if I'm interpreting this right, could be I don't want unhealthy habits to limit me in life from a health standpoint.
For me, the problem is I'm overweight.
Right.
Because I want as much time as possible to live the life I want to live.
Right.
With the people I want to live it with, solving interesting problems in my work as long as I can.
Right.
Playing guitar, playing tennis, having fun, right? Like in that category of play. It would be easier for me to enjoy all the things.
Right.
Because for me, the whole point is designing my best life for me, not telling other people what their best life can be. And I think that's where, when we look at what's the problem we're trying to solve or what is my goal, having the awareness to be like, okay, is this my goal or is this a goal I think I should be attaining?
Yeah.
And then when I look at like, okay, in my work goals, okay, and do I want to make X amount of dollars, or is that simply the culture telling me I should be making X amount of dollars? Would I be happy? I think maybe one of their examples is like being able to ignore sunk costs. Like, did you pay to go to school to become a lawyer or a doctor? Is that simply a gift you gave to yourself that you don't have to accept anymore because you're unhappy doing the work you thought you would like, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's where I start thinking about it.
I mean, that's exactly what I wanted to kind of get to, because it felt like we were just talking about things kind of in a squishy way, even though they're important outcomes.
In order to get to a more meaningful, specific, it just takes me maybe a little longer to get there sometimes. My biggest takeaway is, so far, I'm going to go back over this book probably a couple times. It's like, how do I set myself up to have the life I want that's serving me, that's allowing me to do the things that I'm choosing to do, right? Instead of being passive or going with the flow in a meandering way versus I'm in the flow and I'm loving it, right?
Yeah. Kind of, what is your arm bevel? If you can figure out what your why is, that will help you design the best arm bevel you need. And what do you design and prototype in your life to support that, right?
I think what you're trying to say is that once you identify the goal or the underlying problem that you're trying to solve, the next step is for you to create a plan that has the action steps and the tactics that are going to help you achieve that goal.
Yeah.
That's what you're trying to say.
Yeah. And that's what's part of the prototype, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What else is standing out to you from the book, or what's something that's maybe sticking with you that you're bringing with you as you're moving forward over the next few days and weeks?
One of the chapters was called Designing Your Lives. I found it very interesting that we aren't designing the rest of your life, that you're designing what's next, and that multiple great lives are within you. That was somewhat freeing. It kind of gets back to that idea of every 4 years, you have the opportunity to shift and make a change and adjust and change to something completely new if you want to. That was really interesting.
It kind of helps alleviate maybe the overwhelm that comes with the abundant choice that you may see if you're going, because there's lots of exercises in this book checking in with yourself. Is my health a 10 or is it a 5 or is it a 2?
Mm-hmm.
That gives you awareness. And then when you move into like mind mapping, like ideas for like what's next for me, you start to get all these possibilities and it can start to be possibly overwhelming.
Mm-hmm.
How do I pick? How do I choose? We're kind of presented with this where they kind of help talk you through. There's lots of options and that can be overwhelming. So now the next thing is like weed them out. Brings up the prototyping and testing. And the one thing that I really liked was they're kind of telling you like, if you want to be a writer, take a few days and walk around telling yourself you're a writer, acting as if. Now, if you want to be an astronaut, right? Like, I don't think this is their example, but it's like, if you want to be an astronaut, don't go walking around telling people you're an astronaut.
Yeah, that would be weird.
Like keep it, you're keeping it to yourself,
Yeah.
but you're walking around telling yourself these things. Act as if, right? Fake it till you make it kind of thing. There's a power in that to prototype, thinking about, okay, how would it be if I picked option A? How would it feel if I picked option C? It creates some overwhelm, but then they're also like, okay, and now we're gonna dial it back.
Your example makes me think. One thing I've worked with an executive coach with has been executive leadership, but also a goal of a potential future college presidency. And one thing that she often will have me do, or she'll ask me, is how would a president approach that? And really gets me kind of to your point in that mindset. Not that I go and necessarily do it that way always, depending on the role and the situation and circumstance I'm in. But it does give me a way to start thinking through that. So I can say, okay, I think knowing what I know about others, this might be a way to approach it. It might be a little bit way of prototyping that for me in real life. I never realized that specifically.
A version of that in the book, they call it like the Odyssey plan.
Oh, yeah.
And some of these things, like I didn't do some of the exercises yet.
Sure.
I take it in and I keep going because I kind of want to see everything. And then I might go back and, you take what works and you leave what doesn't too in this. But there's definitely more here than I could break off in the first go through. I'm happy to return to it. But that Odyssey plan, that section, they talk about, different versions of you. Like, what would they look like? And I think that's a pretty interesting exercise that I would shy away from probably years ago. And I mean, that's just, okay, well, nothing's going to happen if I don't imagine it, right? If I don't take the time to envision what could be versus, well, why isn't anything happening? Like you need to be active and that can come in a lot of different ways. But
yeah,
I think they give us a bunch of different examples of how you can be active, whether it's mind mapping, prototyping, acting as if. Like that is a pretty powerful through line for me.
I agree. I know we mentioned this at the beginning, but the idea of radical collaboration,
Yeah.
I also think is an important concept. And they gave some ideas of what this could look like. Everything, I mean, I thought about masterminds, which I've never been a part of one, but I've always been intrigued by. It reminded me of that concept.
Yeah. Chapter 11, building a team.
You've been in a mastermind, haven't you?
I've got a group that I connect with fairly regularly. I guess that's kind of what you could call it. It's like an accountability group in a way, or a mastermind, yeah. And it's one of those things that it reminds me that it's important to go together, and having different circles to go to, whether it's a friend group, a mastermind, like they can serve different functions, and they list through, different types of people that you may need in your circle. What is it? Supporters, players, intimates, going together is new to me. It's not that I don't want to be on a team. Like I played team sports, but as we've gotten older, you spend more and more time not in situations like that. Like they're built into when you're younger, working together with others. I think as I've gotten older, it's more independent work, which I feel completely comfortable with and crave in a lot of ways.
Okay.
But I think I do miss out on the benefits of being in a collaborative environment, with either with a friend group, with a team at a job, or there's a strength in collaboration that it's unrivaled, I think.
Yeah. Well, and, even if you aren't able to develop a whole team, they threw out some other ideas like having a mentor. I've had a few mentors that I've really leaned on that have been really generous with their time. Another example I really liked was the Ask for Help journal. Don't know if you heard
I don't
about,
know if I
if you
remember
remember that,
No.
but really the idea of having a journal that as you're going through and you run into things, you can write down things that you need to ask someone else for help or feedback on. And then you can identify who is the best person to reach out to and run something by. And I thought that was kind of a genius way to collect those pieces that can help you kind of move through as you're designing and thinking.
Yeah. Well, now we have these large language models, these AI like Claude
Yeah.
and ChatGPT and whatever, right? Like I've found myself going to AI and saying, "This is my question. Respond to me like you're so and so," and give that a try and to see what happens. It's kind of an interesting little experiment to do. One thing that popped up, like the mentors thing, like you can find a mentor without asking somebody to be your mentor, and actually asking them can sometimes be a big turnoff. Like they'll be like, "Oh, I don't have time." Like the type of people that you want to be your mentor don't have a whole lot of time on their hands. And so, and I know there's lots of people that talk about like what's the best way to go about creating that relationship. But my point is, there are a lot of great mentors in books and authors. You know what I mean? Like,
Oh, yeah.
do you know what I'm saying? But yeah, also cultivating interpersonal communication with people and stuff, I think
Yeah.
it's important.
Yeah. I agree with you that books can be a really good way to tap into some mentorship for yourself. I would also say I've had fairly good receptivity to asking others to be my mentor with caveats.
That's probably what I meant. Is like just
Yeah.
be
Just be
mindful
aware.
of how you're asking.
Yeah. I mean, well, be very intentional in how you're asking. Um, Make sure that you're extending those asks to people that make sense for you, that you are open to hearing no, because most of the time the people you want to be your mentors are busy, like you said. And then also figuring out how you can also help them and then putting a time limit on it. So, not like asking for someone to be your mentor indefinitely, but just say for this next 6 months, for the next 3 months, 1 year.
Or how about start with, "Hey, can we grab a cup of coffee sometime for
That's
15 minutes? Cup of coffee."
that's an amazing way
It's
to start.
over time.
Things develop.
Develop it over time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Because the smallest ask you can make is probably the easiest one to say yes to. But like you said, if you ask, "Will you be my mentor?" They'll be
Forever.
like, "No."
Well,
Like, whoa,
yeah,
no.
because you don't really know, you haven't framed what that relationship will be like, right? Or what you're
Yeah.
asking for. Or maybe you are asking for an indefinite mentor, and that's a really tall, it could be a tall order to fill,
Yeah.
potentially. I remember what I wanted to say.
Okay.
Designing your life is a really important endeavor. And I want to go back to the idea of really the work that you put into it can really focus on that idea of having happiness and fulfillment in the various areas of your life, and knowing that those areas, career, love, play, and health, those may not be in full balance all the time, but that's not necessarily to be expected.
Yeah, I think it is to be expected that they're never in balance.
Right.
I mean, I always come back with, you're not in you're in the act of balancing which means you're going back and forth and in between. It's work. You're never at equilibrium, I don't think.
Right.
That's the way I frame it, so that I understand that there is effort required. It's just that sometimes there's less effort required over here, and then I'm gonna bring it over and put it into this other area.
Yeah. Yeah, that's all I wanted to say, was just to remind us and others to be gentle with ourselves, but that this work can be rewarding and help us get to where we're trying to go.
Yeah, and that's the whole point of it. Is it's a way to help us get to where we want to go, and to understand, like they say many times, understand where we are so that we can go to where we're seeking and where we're aiming. And a healthy dose of grace goes a long way. Like you said, being gentle with ourselves as we're doing the hard work that is figuring this all out. As we wrap it up here, right? We barely probably scratched the surface. And I think people's mileage will be much further if they have the opportunity to dig into this book on their own. It's widely available on whatever digital or hard version you want. I think there's even a workbook that you can get that just kind of extracts the exercises out of the book a little more clearly and kind of puts it in like a companion guide for you if you wanted to. But
Yeah.
what's on your mind now?
How would you feel if I ended with a quote?
Go for it.
You'll see if you know what it's from, okay?
Okay.
Life moves pretty fast. If you don't stop and look around once in a while, you could miss it.
Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
You got it.
All right, let's get out of here.
Okay, sounds good.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Chicka-chicka.
I'm sorry. I was going to do it too, but I think you do it better than me. I love you so much.
I love you too.